Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7. My name is Saoirse Healey, and a special welcome to all of you who are watching on our brand new Amazon Fire TV app, which is now available to download through the Fire TV, and of course it's free to view. Tonight I am joined in the studio by Drew Hendry, who is an MP for the SNP for Inverness, Ned, Badnoch and Strathspey.
Strathspey,
Strathspey.
almost that. It's Inverness there and
Sorry.
going up in Strathspey, yeah. But delighted to join you, Rosa.
How are you this evening?
Very well. Like everyone else, probably a little bit hotter and stickier than I would usually be, but I think you can't wait all year for good weather and then complain when it comes. So I'm just going to tough it out.
Yeah, very brave of you. Very brave of you. I'm exactly the same.
Yeah.
So, our first story tonight, as always, is our Ukraine update. It is day 477 of the war. Ukraine reported incremental advances in its counteroffensive against Russian forces on Wednesday, in what the Ukrainian Deputy Defense Minister Hanna Maliar described as extremely fierce fighting. In the past day, Ukrainian troops had advanced 200 to 500 meters in various areas near the largely devastated eastern city of Bakhmut, and 300 to 350 meters in the direction of the southeastern city of Zaporizhia. She said, Ukraine is taking significant casualties and making slow progress towards the Russian main line of defense, Western officials have admitted in one of the West's first assessments of the Ukrainian counteroffensive launched on the 4th of June. It's incredibly difficult, the official said. They are going against a well-prepared line that the Russians have had months to prepare. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg has said alliance members must ensure Ukraine keeps getting enough arms to pursue its counteroffensive against Russia. 3 people were killed and at least 13 injured in a Russian missile attack out on the southern Ukrainian city of Odessa, Ukrainian forces have said. Air defense downed 2 caliber cruise missiles, but authorities said the attack still struck civilian infrastructure, including a business center, an educational institution, and a residential complex, restaurants, and shops. 3 people were killed and another 3 injured in an early morning Russian attack on Kramatorsk and Konstantinivka in Donetsk, according to the regional governor. Suspline, Ukraine's state broadcaster, reported that at least 5 houses were destroyed and about 20 more were damaged in Kramatorsk, while 2 houses were destroyed and 55 were damaged in Konstantinivka. The UN nuclear chief Rafael Grossi had delayed a planned trip to the Russian-held Zaporizhia nuclear power station on Wednesday for security reasons as heavy fighting raged in southern Ukraine. The visit to the plant is expected to go ahead today. Russian President Vladimir Putin has appeared to side with his top military commanders in calling for Russia's volunteer detachments fighting in Ukraine to be placed under the direct control of the Ministry of Defense. The order from Moscow had been seen as an attempt to rein in the Wagner mercenary group and its leader Yevgeny Prigozhin by incorporating them into the army. Western microchips and other components coming largely via China are being used to manufacture Russian cruise and ballistic missiles that are being launched at Ukraine, Kyiv has said in a presentation prepared for G7 members this week. The documents call for world-leading economies to further tighten export controls. The Chechen ruler Ramzan Kadyrov has said that one of his senior commanders was alive and well, dismissing reports that he had been killed or wounded in Ukraine. Adam Tilimahankov heads the Chechen division of the Russian National Guard and is also a member of Russia's parliament. So, Drew, speaking of the counteroffensive and the kind of need to keep the foreign aid up, is this a view that you also agree with? How important do you think that the foreign aid element to the counteroffensive is?
Well, it's really important that everybody stands squarely behind Ukraine as it attempts to defeat this illegal invasion by Vladimir Putin's forces. The fact is that it's not a time for us to be, thinking, we've got a wee bit of fatigue about this, or it's, just rumbling on or whatever. We've got to make sure that we absolutely support and continue to support the people of Ukraine in many different ways. But, in terms of supplying aid, that's also vital at the moment. The consequences of not doing so are, extremely. If Putin's allowed to, to get away with anything, including grabbing territory, even if he looks to sue for peace at the moment and hold on to the territory got, that sets a very dangerous precedent. And Ukraine must have its sovereignty protected. So again, we've got to do what we can to make sure that we're, aiding the Ukrainians in fighting Putin off. If not, there's quite likely to be a domino effect that's also quite likely to affect the geopolitical situation around the world. You only have to look at the situation with China and Taiwan. Many people are looking on at the situation between Russia and Ukraine and seeing if that's an example of what could happen. We can't allow that. We've got to maintain the rule of law, the rule of international law, and do what we can to support the people of Ukraine.
So moving on to our top story of the night, the Privileges Committee has published its report on Boris Johnson. So the Committee of Privileges were tasked with investigating Boris Johnson for misleading the House of Commons following Partygate. And today it's published its findings. The 108-page final report from the committee has found that Johnson not only misled the Commons, but also deliberately misled the Privileges Committee, breached confidence by leaking parts of the report prior to it being published, impugned the committee and thus the parliamentary process, as well as engaging in a campaign of abuse and attempted intimidation of the committee. The report goes on to elaborate on the manner in which Johnson misled MPs, stating that he did so by stating that the rules and guidance were followed at all times at number 10 and had been followed when he was at the gatherings, failing to tell the House of Commons about his knowledge of gatherings that had broken the rules or guidance, saying that he had relied on assurances that the rules hadn't been broken when he did not accurately represent these assurances to the Commons, and they were not appropriate authoritative, giving the impression that Sue Gray should be investigated before he could answer questions when he had personal knowledge he did not reveal, and by claiming to be correcting the record, but instead continuing to mislead the Commons and the committee. If Boris Johnson had not resigned as an MP before the report was published, the committee would have recommended that he be suspended from Parliament for 90 days. The Privileges Committee also recommended that he should not be entitled to a former member's pass, which allows former MPs to access some of the parts of Parliament and some catering facilities. The Privileges Committee has said that it found Boris Johnson's decisions to mislead MPs to be a very serious offence, calling it a matter of great importance that goes to the heart of our democracy, as the function of the House of Commons is based on ministers telling the truth, and MPs cannot do their job if ministers are dishonest. They stated that the former PM's actions had the potential to undermine people's faith in democracy. The report went on to clarify that while ministers can make mistakes, these are and should be corrected, whereas Boris Johnson engaged in repeated and continual denials of the fact. The committee considered this the frequency with which he closed his mind to those facts and to what was obvious. The fact that he sought to rewrite the meaning of the rules and guidance to fit his own evidence, as well as his after-the-event rationalizations, such as those made in regards to the nature and extent of the assurances he received, the words used, and the purpose of the assurances and who they came from, when considered the nature and extent of Johnson's culpability in misleading the House. In terms of the evidence and how they reached their conclusions, the report emphasizes that all evidence was given on oath, that it had disclosed all the documents that had been submitted to the inquiry without any redaction to Boris Johnson, and that the former PM was given notice of all the issues that the evidence unearthed so he could provide his own written evidence, as well as receiving a provisional conclusions from the committee on the 8th of June 2023 so that he was able to respond. In his rebuttal to the committee, former Prime Minister Boris Johnson has stated that the report is a charade now that no MP is free from vendetta, and that the report contributes to a protracted political assassination. He also restated that he believed that these events were lawful, and that he believed that his participation was lawful as well. The full final report from the Committee of Privileges can be read online. So, Drew, I have a whole host of questions for you, someone who sits down in Westminster, but what are your initial thoughts on the former Prime Minister's conduct throughout this inquiry?
Well, I think it's a matter of record that we've pointed out time and time again. Boris Johnson's lies, his misleading of people, his breaking of the law, since, way before he became Prime Minister and into this conclusion of the committee. It's important to note that this committee is Tory dominated. It's one of the situations in Parliament where you have these committees. If the government's in power, it gets to load the committee with its own MPs. So for them to have come out with this damning report tells you something about where Boris Johnson has got to, not just with the people of Scotland, not just with the people of the nations of the UK, but indeed with his fellow parliamentarians in the Tory party as well. He's reacting in a typical way for Boris Johnson. I think many people have described it as Trumpian. It is, to try and deflect from his own failures. He blames everybody else. The ironic fact here is that this committee report is focusing on one aspect of his conduct in Parliament, obviously the very serious issues over the breaking of his own rules during Partygate. But it's not the first time that he's told lies in Parliament. And it's quite extraordinary that, we were leading a debate just a year or so ago in which we were, against all parliamentary precedent, or most of it anyway, able to have a debate about him as a liar in Parliament. So, the committee report, as I say, is damning, but it could have gone so much further. There could have been more to discuss about Boris Johnson and his behaviour, the way he's treated, not only the public, but the people around him. Even the way that he's savaged his own MPs who were trying to at least inject some reason before the last election, where they found themselves deselected and losing the whip because they challenged his position on quite a lot of things, particularly what he was doing around Brexit. So it's no surprise. I think the interesting thing is that it's taken this long for Parliament to deal with him, that it's actually come to this state where that they've literally been forced into declaring him unfit for office when everybody else has known that for such a long time.
And so obviously you spoke about how Parliament's been dealing with it, but what do you think that the Conservative government, what do you think is going to be their next steps? How do you think that the government is going to react to these kinds of findings?
Well, what they should do is immediately cancel his prime ministerial honours list that he, has bizarrely been able to lodge and get, people who, I can't see any good reason for them meriting, other than they are friends, donors, or cronies, into the House of Lords, and to get peerages. these things should be cancelled right away. That's just a matter of fact. The problem, of course, for Rishi Sunak is that he's embedded in the same scandals that Boris Johnson was. He was, in number 11 at the same time that this was all going on at number 10. To suggest that he had no idea that Boris Johnson was doing this, or indeed they were breaking the rules at number 10 at the same time, I think is very, very hard to believe. At the very least, I think he should come out and apologise that it has taken this long to unearth this, that he should make an apology on behalf of the Tory party for the conduct of Boris Johnson. Because don't forget, whilst we're, having waited a long time for his comeuppance here, which is more than overdue, that these transgressions that were being detailed in the report were during a time when people were losing loved ones, were being barred from going to funerals, were being forced to stay at home and not indulge in the kind of activity that was being put forward in order to protect others during the pandemic. And yet we've seen from some of the detail in the report today that this was a completely cavalier. It was just almost a free-for-all in number 10 during this time. So, an apology, a proper apology is well overdue. And I think also an explanation from Rishi Sunak about what he knew.
And how do you think that this is going to impact the Conservatives going into a new election? There's been initial polls that suggest it could either be a Labour victory or it could result in a hung parliament. What's your thoughts on the kind of long-term effect of this inquiry?
Well, you would hope that the Tories would suffer more, damage from this, that they would, go back further. But they're already pretty low in the polls. I think they'd be desperately looking to see if there's some way they can draw a line under Boris Johnson. I don't really think that's a tenable position to do that, not unless they have a wholesale change of some of the policies that they're bringing through. They're still taking forward a lot of the horrendous policies that were generated under that, Boris Johnson premiership. It's a very hard right-wing government just now. You see that in terms of what they're doing, to crack down on and stop industrial action. You see what they're doing in terms of, trying to stop peaceful protest. You see what they're doing in terms of immigration and the culture wars that they're stoking. All of that still circling around number 10 just now. They don't deserve, to get any public support. But by the other side of the coin, we see in Westminster, as we saw yesterday, the Labour Party are, on many of these issues are tracking along with the Tories, unable to challenge them. So I think it's Hobson's choice for voters who are looking for a choice between Tory and Labour. And as we've been saying yesterday, and we say every day, in Parliament, really what we need to do is get rid of Tory governments forever. And, the only way to do that is through independence.
And final question on this kind of topic. Do you think that Rishi could try and get out of it by giving Boris Johnson a seat in the House of Lords, as he tried to do with Ruth Davidson, to kind of stop him being a threat? Do you think that that's a far-fetched theory, or do you think that that's something that could potentially happen?
Well, first of all, I think the one thing is that, regardless of anything else, that Boris Johnson has no place in democratic organisations in the UK. So he shouldn't be in Westminster Parliament at all, let alone in the House of Lords. That should be an absolute bar. The report today is looking to revoke his privileges for, as you read out earlier, for even getting into the parliamentary estate, and that's the way it should be. The idea that you might get in through the back door into the House of Lords is completely untenable, and I would hope that if anything like that happened, then the public would severely react to that situation. But of course, you make a fair point, because the House of Lords is often used as a place where they can pack somebody off who's been who's been doing what they're told, or somebody's become a problem. They can pack them off, or indeed, as we've seen with cash for honours and everything else, if they're doing a favour, they can pack them off there. The simple fact is that there shouldn't be any Boris Johnson in the House of Lords, and there shouldn't be any Lords in the House of Lords. There should be no House of Lords. It's a unelected body, and it's groaning with cronies and policemen just now, and that's not good for any democratic institution.
And how do you think that the vote on this is going to go on Monday?
Well, it's hard to say. It's a free vote. I would hope that MPs roundly back the committee's findings. I suspect that there'll be hardcore of the what used to be the European Reform Group. Tory MPs, those very hard right ones who will seek to make excuses for Boris Johnson. I think it really is time for a bit of humility, though. And, certainly speaking for myself, I'll be voting to uphold the recommendations. And I would imagine, but you can take nothing for granted at Westminster, I would imagine the vast majority of MPs who are on the estate will do the same.
Like you say, you can never know. You never know.
You know.
So our next story of the night: urgent action is needed to realise the huge offshore potentials. The Minister for Energy and the Environment, Gillian Martin, has called for immediate UK government action to make the transformative potential of offshore wind a reality. Ms. Martin said significant reinforcement and expansion of the electricity and power grid is needed, using the UK government's reserved powers to connect offshore wind projects, including ScotWind, with the potential to power many millions more homes. Ahead of a speech at one of the UK's largest offshore wind conferences in London today, the Energy Minister also called for new powers to modernise the planning and consenting system for grid infrastructure to be devolved to the Scottish Parliament. Ms. Martin is meeting with a range of key industry figures at Renewable UK's Global Offshore Wind 2023, including outgoing UK offshore wind champion Tim Pick, whose independent report made a series of key recommendations to the UK government to accelerate delivery of offshore wind energy. The minister said, Scotland finds itself at the forefront of a renewable energy revolution. ScotWind, as the world's largest commercial leasing round for floating offshore wind, has set the benchmark for industrial scale deployment. We need to be ready to capitalise on that and take forward the greatest economic opportunity of recent times. There is more that Ofgem, the National Grid Electricity System Operator, and the UK government can do. High transmission charges remain a key barrier to net zero in Scotland, and a new approach is needed. Reform of the connections process is urgently required to allow projects to join when they're ready to do so, and the UK government needs to provide the right powers to the Scottish Parliament and the Scottish Government that will enable us to modernise the planning and consenting system for grid infrastructure. So, Drew, do you think that if these powers are devolved, it would increase Scotland's ability to hit the net zero targets? Do you think that this is a really key element?
It's absolutely fundamental to maximising the opportunity. When you look at what will be generated by the 17 offshore wind generation sites, that you're talking about an enormous amount of power, some 25 gigawatts, and it has the infrastructure has to be there to allow that to be transported and exported. This is a massive market. Don't forget that last year Scotland generated enough electricity to power all of the electricity needs for the homes in Scotland for 3 years. So there is massive potential there for us to export this energy, this clean energy, renewable energy, in the same way that we have in previous decades with oil and gas, but the infrastructure needs to be there. More importantly, the infrastructure and the costs need to be fair as it's put together, because I completely agree with what the minister is saying here. You're looking at a situation where it costs perhaps millions of pounds to connect to the grid, where we're generating electricity here in Scotland, and yet there are subsidies for doing it in the south of England. Now that's not a fair situation. If you carry that through to domestic energy, we still have the situation where I'm talking to you from the Highlands just now, where we pay more per unit because of where we are than other places as well. Now there are so many inequities in the energy market that we need a complete clean sweep there. One of the best ways to enable that would be for us to have the devolved powers in Scotland. Even better, to have the full powers of independence so that we can properly exploit this opportunity, create jobs, make a massive contribution to the world's effort on climate change and carbon reduction. But we can only do that if we're able to operate in the way that we should. And all of this activity that we've been doing over the past decade or so in terms of renewable energy, we've done with one hand tied behind our back because a lot of these powers are held at Westminster. For example, and if you bear with me just for a wee second, when the UK government put things like contracts for difference up, they excluded onshore wind. Now that meant that in Scotland we were at a disadvantage and had to use our planning and environmental powers in order to make sure that we could press ahead with that. It's very, very similar in terms of this grid issue just now. And what we really need to do is see the UK government move much more quickly and to press ahead with the demands that are being made in order to make sure this infrastructure is sufficient to realise this opportunity.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So, next story follows on that theme from the potential of Scotland to Scotland is actually outperforming the rest of the UK in terms of its exports. HMRC for the regional trade statistics released today for the first quarter of 2023, and it shows that in the year ending March 2023, Scotland's international exports are once again outperforming the UK as a whole. When excluding oil and gas, the value of the total international exports is up 17.7% for Scotland on the previous year, whereas for the rest of the UK, it is only up 13.5% over the same period. Commenting on the latest statistics, Trade Minister Richard Lochhead said, "These latest figures show Scotland is recovering from the pandemic at a faster rate than the rest of the UK, demonstrating the importance and success of our export growth plan. This is also a testament to the resilience and quality of businesses in Scotland. It's extremely encouraging that all but one of our exported commodities have increased in values. Drink exports showed impressive results, increasing by 27.4%, as well as machinery and transport exports, which increased by 27.3%. So, Drew, in your opinion, why is Scottish exports improving and growing so much faster than exports from the rest of the UK?
Well, I think in large part it's due to efforts that are made by businesses in Scotland who are absolutely focused on making sure that the quality products that they're putting out into the world market are well exposed. But I think that's aided particularly in Scotland by the international engagement that the Scottish Government does with its trade missions out in various different countries, likes of Germany and United States and elsewhere, in Japan and so forth, where we're going directly to the market to talk about Scottish goods. We've seen the UK government try to crack down on our direct engagement, which predates the SNP government, of course, but it's become another one of these handy targets for UK ministers to try and take powers away from Scotland. But the cost is there. The Scottish government, the Scottish trade missions are going out and talking about Scottish products. They're talking about Scottish business. They're talking about the Scottish brand value, and it's something that's globally respected and that people really want to take advantage of. It's no surprise that when you look at the figures that were released by the Scottish Parliament's information uh, program there, the SPICE, that Scottish exports, when you look at our manufactured goods, 63% of those go outside of the UK and into international markets, including the EU. So we're an exporting nation, and we're doing very well indeed. You'll often hear that our biggest market is the rest of the UK. That's true, but that's mainly things like, for example, oil, gas, renewable electricity, insurance, and financial services, amongst other things like that. As I say, manufactured goods, we're very, very good at getting these out into the world, and that's what we do well. So when I hear James Cleverly, the Tory Foreign Secretary, saying that he's a champion for Scotland, and he's going to do a better job, you have to, if not take it with a pinch of salt, sometimes laugh out loud at the arrogance of that, because I was questioning him just the other day in the Foreign Affairs Committee about what he's doing to try and access the growing US market for clean hydrogen supply chain, because they've just had their Inflation Reduction Act passed. There's many billions of dollars that are there to access in terms of new markets. Scotland's brilliantly positioned and has a growing and innovative hydrogen economy that's getting some real steam behind it, if you'll pardon the mixed metaphor there. And yet he was clueless about that opportunity, and he admitted to me that he hadn't even spoken to the Scottish minister this year, or indeed even as far back as he could remember. He was struggling to see if it was last year or whatever that he'd done that. So there's no effort in part of the UK to do this. But in terms of the Scottish government and our trading bases around the world, I think that's making a difference. But I just come back to where I started with that. I think really at the heart of that, it's the efforts put in by our companies to overcome the barriers that have been put in front of them through Brexit, just to try and access new markets, to try and make sure that the markets that they're already in, the European ones, we're trying to get more quality products into there. And I think they're doing a good job in succeeding in that. And that's why we're seeing that combination of factors is why we're seeing a more successful picture in terms of exports in Scotland.
Mm-hmm. So our next story of the night, safe access zones proposals were formally submitted to the Scottish Parliament today. The Scottish Greens MSP Gillian McKay has formally submitted proposals to introduce safe access zones to abortion clinics to the Scottish Parliament after it has processed more than 12,000 consultation responses to her bid. The proposals, which have been publicly backed by First Minister Humza Yousaf, former First Minister Nicola Sturgeon, and it needed 18 signatures minimum from MSPs from two parties to secure the right to be formally introduced as business. It surpassed this limit within half an hour of the voting being open. So now that has happened, the documents will be lodged with the Parliament's chamber desk and sit with officials for 30 days before being progressed after the summer recess. That will lead to stage 1 of parliamentary scrutiny, likely to begin around October. Commenting on the final proposal for Gillian McKay's Members' Bill, Women's Health Minister Jenny Minto said, "I welcome the publication of the final proposal for Gillian McKay's Members' Bill on safe access zones alongside the consultation analysis. This is an important milestone on the road to introducing legislation to protect women from unwanted influence, distress, or alarm when accessing abortion services. The Scottish Government is grateful to Ms McKay for the work she has undertaken to reach this stage." It's absolutely unacceptable for women to face any fear of harassment, intimidation, or unwanted influence when accessing essential healthcare services. And it goes without saying that the same goes for healthcare staff just doing their job. We are committed to supporting Ms. McKay with her members' bill, which will deliver national legislation on safe access zones. Drew, safe access zones, is this something that you would like to see much more widespread?
Well, it's something that I've, taken an interest in looking afar from the Westminster Parliament, because obviously this is reserved to Holyrood, and they are looking at the details there. I think it's, really important. My personal view, and I'd like to say I'm not an MSP, so I've not been involved in this, that is that women accessing healthcare should always feel safe and should never feel any stress in terms of going into that. And I think that must be particularly important at a time when you're dealing with something just so personal and and life affecting. The idea that you might be feel intimidated as you're going to do something like that, I think is something that we must try and make sure doesn't happen. And I think the consultation is, obviously it's going to be a period where people can feed in their thoughts on that. But it is important, as I say, that women are able to access services and feel comfortable about doing so, especially for something as deeply as personal as this.
Okay. And so we're staying on that same theme of women's rights to access healthcare, access abortion, and protests have broken out in Poland after a pregnant woman died in hospital. They began following reports of a pregnant woman's death in a hospital in May. On Monday, Poland's patients' rights ombudsman Bartolomew Mielkiewicz said that John Paul II Hospital should have told 33-year-old Dorota Lalick that her life could have been saved by getting an abortion, and that the hospital had violated her human rights by withholding that information. Dorota Lalick died in hospital in Novi Targ on the 24th of May, 3 days after she was admitted. Lalick's husband told the Polish media, "No one gave us a choice or the chance to save Dorota because no one told us that her life was at risk," saying that the entire time they were giving us false hope that everything was going to be okay. Just 2 years before, a 30-year-old identified as Isabella died under similar circumstances after being denied an abortion in the southern Polish town of Przeżyna, leading to protests and scrutiny of a 2020 ruling which affects pregnancies with complications. Abortion is legal in Poland if the pregnancy poses a risk to the life or health of the pregnant person, or if it is the result of a crime. Despite this, Poland's constitutional tribunal ruled that abortion due to fetal defects was unconstitutional, which made the situation difficult for doctors. The founder of All Poland Women's Strike, the organization which set up the protests, Marta Lempart, said that all pregnant women are in danger the moment they're referred to hospitals in Poland. "We are afraid of all doctors because we don't know which ones will act to prevent their patient's death." Polish Health Minister Adam Niedzielski commented on Monday, saying that in Poland, every woman whose health and life is in danger has the right to terminate their pregnancy, that is, have an abortion. Adding that it is difficult to say that this situation is just the fault of the government when doctors are refusing to perform abortions permitted by law in cases when not only the health is endangered but even life. The hospital in which Lalick died has not performed any abortions since at least 2018, and the director of the hospital in 2005 supposedly announced that no abortions would take place as it was against God's law and the Pope's teaching. The current director, Marek Wierzba, is a local councillor for the right-wing Sovereign Poland Party, which supports a ban on abortion. The hospital has denied that either Wierzba's political allegiance or the papal patronage contributed to Lalick's death. This comes in the same week a 44-year-old woman in England was sentenced to more than 2 years in prison for procuring drugs to induce an abortion after the legal 10-week time limit. So just quickly on this one, doctors being unwilling to conduct completely legal abortions, how much responsibility would you say lays with the doctors versus the legislators?
Well, I think the idea that somebody would go into hospital in a situation where they're needing treatment, and that being refused when it's perfectly legal is it is you've got to ask, why would you be doing the job if you're not going to do what you're supposed to be doing there? Look, women's rights are under threat here in terms of their ability to access services, and I don't know what's going on in Poland, but there is an issue around the globe at the moment where women's rights and human rights are being stripped away in various different places, and we've got to be alert to the fact that that's happening. It's really important, I think, for us to be standing up for women and the right to their own, as I said earlier in the earlier piece, that the right to access healthcare in the way that they feel is appropriate for them. That's a very important thing to be doing. This is a deeply tragic case that you're talking about here with the woman that's been affected here, and it is heartbreaking when you understand what's happened there. But I think we've just got to, wherever we are in the world, we've got to be vigilant about the fact that a lot of people are trying to roll back rights that have been hard won over many decades, and we must stand up for the rights of people across the board, and that is no less for women and their rights to choose their own futures and the way they live their lives than anything else.
Absolutely. So, our next story of the night moves further afield. The US power companies quietly pushed $215 million into US politics via dark money groups. So it's been revealed that $250 million of dark money in recent years has gone to political donations. So in this context, dark money means money spent in order to influence elections where the source of the money is not disclosed to voters. Giving dark money to tax-exempt groups is legal in the US, but several utility companies have been criticized for it. In Arizona, Alabama, there was backlash against power companies against using dark money to help friendly regulators get elected, while in Michigan, regulators barred one company from using any dark money at all after it spent $34 million on politics in only 3 years. It is possible that some power companies' dark money hides illegality, such as in Ohio in 2021, when the First Energy Corporation pleaded guilty to using dark money groups to bribe politicians in exchange for bailouts. In Florida, Power and Light FPL used dark money to meddle with ballot initiatives and the election of 5 politicians who were interested in tackling high prices of electrical bills and environment and climate goals. Companies giving dark money can also have an impact on consumers, such as in Arizona in 2014, when power company Arizona Public Service gave $10.7 million to dark money groups that donated to key regulatory commission races. The 2 Republican commissioners backed by the dark money groups won, and in 2017, they supported the power company's request for a $95 million a year increase in electrical bills. In 2019, a subpoena from a regulator finally proved that the company was responsible for the political spending. The groups that receive the donations often have generic or patriotic American names. They rarely disclose their funding sources and often transfer large quantities of money amongst themselves. Regulations mandating public disclosure of dark money utility political spending are rare at a state level. Federal regulators stopped requiring public line-by-line accounting of public power company political spending in 2002. There are 44 regulated for-profit utilities across the US, according to the Edison Electrical Institute, their trade association. 23 of them have self-disclosed as giving nearly $100 million to so-called dark money groups between 2014 and 2020. Some disclosed in more detail than others. Many companies do not report the total amounts they have donated, but rather the amount that cannot be deducted from taxes. Others don't disclose the dark money giving of their subsidiaries. Overall, the amount of dark money uncovered by regulators and the Department of Justice was about $115 million, which was greater than the total amount disclosed by these companies. So all of this dark money that's been disclosed, what does that tell us about the health of American democracy right now?
Well, I think this has been an issue in America for some time. The fact that they've, had very, very bizarre funding mechanisms. They've got corporations who are recognised as individuals, and and have these corporations, these funds have rights. But I think the interesting thing about this is how we compare it to what's happening in the UK. I mean, we've had quite a few experiences here in the UK where dark money's been used. Indeed, in Scotland, there were fines by the Electoral Commission for donations to the Scottish Tories in 2019 and 2020 over sums for hundreds of thousands of pounds. The fines were dropped in the ocean, of course, at the time. But these are things that are happening around the globe. And whilst the sums are quite eye-watering when you look at the American political situation, it's really just an enlarged version of what's happening at Westminster. We know there's lots of questions to be asked about Russian money that's been swirling around, London as well. So it is something that's interesting. It does suggest that there are problems in US politics, but it's perhaps not an awful lot different in there to the UK, and particularly in the Westminster system. I think it'll be interesting to see how this one plays out, whether there's any attempt to rein that in. But as I say, I keep coming back to the point that it's not really that different. The sums of money might be slightly different, might be talking about millions rather than billions, but it's not really that different to what's happening at Westminster in terms of some of the dark money that's been used there, and in previous campaigns, particularly during the Brexit campaign.
It's a pretty damning analysis there. So our next story of the night, new strategy by the Scottish Government has been launched, which is a 10-year cancer strategy which aims to significantly cut out the number of people diagnosed with late-stage cancer and to reduce the health inequalities associated with the disease. Currently, around 42% of cancers are diagnosed at the later stages, but through continued investment in the Detect Cancer Early, the DCE program, the ambition is to reduce the number of diagnosed at stages 3 and 4 in a year 10 of the plan to 24%. That would mean around 5,000 fewer people diagnosed with late-stage disease in the year 2033. The strategy is underpinned by a 3-year cancer action plan that contains 136 actions. Both documents focus on improving all areas of cancer services through prevention and diagnosis through to treatment and post-treatment care, a particular focus on the currently less survivable cancers. Health Secretary Michael Matheson launched the plan at the Cancer Centre at the Western General Hospital in Edinburgh, where he met staff delivering the single point of contact service, which helps to ensure patients have dedicated person-centred treatment throughout. Mr. Matheson said, "Our absolute focus is to improve cancer survival and make sure that everyone gets excellent and accessible care. The pandemic had a significant impact on all aspects of health and social care, and cancer services was no exception. This cancer strategy will make sure that we are properly delivering these vital services and clearly directing future investments. The Scottish Cancer Network will be at the heart of our strategic ambitions, settling out agreed best clinical practice and assuring people with cancer of common standards of care no matter where they live. We will continue to work closely alongside the NHS, third sector, and industry to deliver quality cancer services for the people of Scotland. The new Scottish Cancer Strategic Board will provide an oversight of the strategy and action plan." So, our final story of the night: the Scottish Government have launched Human Rights Bill consultation. So, the Scottish Government is seeking views on plans to enshrine international human rights, including the right to health and an adequate standard of living, into Scots law for the first time. As part of a forthcoming human rights bill, the proposals look to reduce inequality and would place a broader range of human rights at the centre of how Scotland's frontline public services are delivered, as well as its policy and lawmaking processes. People would also be able to seek justice where their rights were not upheld. Legislation would incorporate United Nations economic, social, and cultural rights and environmental standards, as well as rights relating to women, disabled people, and people who experience racism. Social Justice Secretary Shirley Ann Somerville said, "Human rights are the basic rights and freedoms that belong to everyone. Our ambitious proposals will protect and promote these rights in every aspect of life in Scotland, from government and parliament through to the everyday interactions people have with frontline services, and ensure they apply equally across society. Making these rights enforceable in Scots law with the limits of devolution is the right thing to do, particularly for a country striving to reduce inequality, increase opportunity, and tackle poverty. I would encourage people to share their views on the detailed proposals through our consultation and help make human rights real for everybody." Just as a quick last comment, what's your opinion on human rights being enshrined into Scots law directly?
Well, I think, as I said earlier, this is a really important time to look to protect human rights. We've seen, the systematic attempt to strip that away, particularly, over the past 8 years, where we've, seen attacks on various different rights that have been hard fought for and won over many decades by many people doing a really hard shift and putting their lives on the line often to be able to achieve that. And now to see that being, under attack, I think it's incumbent on, Scotland to say wherever we can, look, we're going to protect these rights, we're going to enhance them wherever we possibly can, and to make sure that we're doing our bit wherever we can. Of course, again, a lot of things will get in the way of that. We've seen when the Scottish Government and the Scottish Parliament indeed voted, with an overwhelming majority to see the UN's rights of the child in ensconced in law. That was overruled by Westminster. But that shouldn't stop us, and I, very much welcome these moves to make sure that human rights are front and centre of the Scottish political debate.
And before we go tonight, we just wanted to pay tribute to George Leslie, who sadly died today. He was a veterinary servant by trade and was a figurehead of the independence movement, a deputy leader of the SNP from 1969 to 1971. He held various executive posts over the decades, contesting elections at local government, Westminster, and a European level. And that is it. Drew, is there anything about George Leslie? Did you ever meet him? Did you ever work with him?
Well, I just mentioned a few seconds ago about the things being hard fought for and won by people who'd made real sacrifices, and George wasn't just an absolute warrior when it came to protecting people and looking to carry forward their rights, particularly in Scotland, and particularly in the cause of independence, so that we can create a fairer and more just Scotland. He was a really good guy. Anybody who met George couldn't help but be impressed by his warmth and his wit and his intelligence. I'm finding it quite difficult to talk about him just now, because he was such such a key figure, right? Just a genuinely nice guy, but also, shrewd and hardworking, person who pulled the party forward with him like so many others had done in the past. But more importantly than that, worked to pull communities together and work to make things better for people. He'll be very sadly missed.
Sounds amazing, all the work that he's done. Yeah, definitely will be sorely missed. So that's it from us this evening. Thank you so much, Drew, for joining us in the studio tonight. I hope you've enjoyed yourself. Thank you for your contributions. So before you go, I just wanted to remind everyone that Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on you, the generosity of our supporters. So to everyone who's donated and to everyone who's signed up to make regular monthly payments, thank you so much. Of course, our programmes will always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. We've set ourselves a target of adding 10,000 new subscribers to enable us to employ staff and make even more programmes for you at home to enjoy. I've been Saoirse Healey. Good night and thank you for watching.